Friends, in this course on Introductory Rural Sociology, Continuity and Change, we are going to speak about the introduction to rural society and peasants. Friends, as we all know that we have to cover the various aspects which are seen as the foundation of the rural society, and within that framework we try to speak about that how the emergence of rural sociology has taken place in the globe and also how it has taken place in India. That of course is going to be the one important discussion, followed by the various village studies which have been covered. As we all know that the 1950s was the era which was marked by the presence of the number of village studies. So, we are going to speak about that what are the methodological issues, what are the theoretical issues which are linked to the village studies in India. That is second important component. And the third in that sense of course is the sociological analysis of the various phenomenon. I think we have certain battery of concepts like trying to speak about the dominant caste, Jajmani system, or we try to speak about the folk urban continuum and many other things. All these things in that sense are going to be discussed, and the last thing in that sense which we are going to discuss in this particular module is the issue of conceptualizing peasantry. So, in that sense it is going to give a broader picture about how we are going to introduce ourselves towards the rural society sociologically, and also in terms of looking and locating the various phenomena which are present in the rural society. So, that is the basic thrust of this particular module which we are going to discuss upon. So, I think when we try to speak about certain items, I think Indian society has its own uniqueness, and this course which we are trying to deal, which is basically Introductory Rural Sociology, Continuity and Change. I think when we try to speak about this, Introductory Rural Sociology, Continuity and Change. This course basically deals with different ways in which we try to understand what is the rural sociology, and also we try to see that how we try to see the emergence of rural sociology in terms of the word framework, and also how it has taken a shape in the Indian society. And in that context, I think the understanding of the emergence of rural sociology becomes an important issue. Now, the point of course is when we try to speak about that how rural sociology has come into prominence, and there may be many things which may come in our mind that rural sociology it started where or how it has taken its trajectory. And for your surprise, I would like to mention that rural sociology it has its origin in United States. So, the subject, the theme which of course has a take from the developed nation, I think matters a lot, and there may be many queries in your mind that why rural sociology has emerged in the United States. But before that, let us try to understand that how we try to see rural sociology. I think rural sociology basically we try to see it as a specialized discipline which tries to understand the rural in a specific way, and this rural basically can include various aspects, either it is the question of social interaction, the institutions and the activities along with the social changes which are taking place in the rural society. All of them comes into the domain of the understanding about the rural sociology, and in that way whatsoever we try to study in the rural environment become part and parcel about the rural sociology. So, when we try to see that how rural can be seen as a unique entity, we have to see it in terms of the progress, we have to see it in terms of the prosperity, and we also have to see it in terms of the various challenges which are coming up. And in that context, when we try to speak about the understanding of the rural sociology, as I mentioned earlier also that it has its origin basically in the United States. And here I think we have to have one thing very much clear in our mind, that when we try to speak about the rural sociology in United States, it does not mean that the United States has the predominance of the rural society, because we try to see it in a different framework, especially we try to also have a distinction between how the rural society and the urban society are to be seen distinctively. Now, when we say rural, I think what makes something to be rural, that becomes more significant. Like when we try to speak about the rural, the things which may come up in your mind are that what is rural? It may incorporate maybe the question of a specific landscape, or we try to see rural in terms of talking about the agrarian. We may also try to see the rural in terms of the specific land use, and also we try to see that rural may speak about certain amount of homogeneity. And beyond that, if we try to see in terms of certain other elements, we try to speak about the specific form of social stratification, which is part and parcel of the rural society. We also try to see rural in terms of the specific population, and also we try to see that what becomes rural is something which has been defined by the state to be the rural. So, I think these are the different ways in which we try to see that how rural can be undertaken with regard to the understanding about the specific society. And I think if you try to see these parameters in which the rural can be seen, I think the most appropriate which suits the understanding about the rural is that a society which is marked by the presence of the agrarian economy. So, the agrarian economy, which we say that majority of the people, the majority population are basically involved in the agriculture and the allied activities, that makes something to be rural. So, that is how we try to see that what is not there in urban definitely is that agriculture is not the main primary occupation, but in the rural the primary occupation is basically the agriculture and the allied activities. So, the rural has to be seen in terms of the people, the majority of the population which are basically practicing the agriculture is something which makes something to be rural. And here I think apart from trying to speak about that the rural has its own uniqueness, we also try to see what has happened in the United States and how it has gone into a specific specialized discipline, because we try to see that rural sociology is something which will be seen not simply as a study about the rural society, it is also seen as a group of specialists, a group of sociologists who are basically inclined towards understanding the origin, the development and the changes which took place in the rural society. And here I think we can say that when we try to speak about how the rural has come in the United States. So, one thing that becomes important is that we try to see that the period which is marked from 1890 to 1920 in the United States was the landmark period in which we try to see the emergence of sociology as a discipline. And here the important thing is that rural sociology, which we try to see in terms of a specific understanding, we basically try to see that United States has the understanding about the rural from 1820 onwards. But was that the period in which we can say that rural sociology has got its establishment? So, I think the straight answer will be no, because in different sectors or in the different parts we try to see that the rural sociology has been understood and has been undertaken by various scholars. It may include the contribution by Charles Anderson, who has been considered to be one of an important pillar in the Chicago school at Chicago University. Then we also try to see the contribution of Butterfields, who also has contributed towards the understanding about the rural sociology, and he was belonging to the Michigan University, but he also has seen the understanding about the rural sociology not as a specialist, but trying to study the rural society. Then we also have certain other people which may include John Morris Gillin, whose contribution appears to be significant basically with regard to the development of sociology and that too the rural society. But significantly we find the contribution of M.H. Giddings, whose contribution we try to see in the Columbia University, and his contribution is considered to be responsible for the emergence of rural sociology in a specific way. Now, these are the people who were the not the pioneers, but to some extent they had tried to invent upon the development of rural sociology, and we try to see the Thomas Carver's work, which was equally significant in terms of understanding the rural sociology, but these contributions could not make rural sociology as a specialized discipline. The reason being that these studies or these scholars tries to see the rural society in a very specific fashion, and in that context if you try to see, we try to find out that in terms of a specific discipline we did not find the location of rural sociology. Then what makes rural sociology to be significant, or how and who has basically led to the contribution of rural sociology as a discipline? And here I think one important landmark which we try to see is the period which is marked by 1907. So, it was 1907 which marked the emergence of rural sociology in a very specific way, and that was by whom? It was not by the what you can say the academician, it was not by the philosopher, rather it was basically an attempt by the President of the United States, that is T.S. Roosevelt. So, it was basically the contribution of the President T.S. Roosevelt, who had initiated the development of rural sociology to some extent, and in 1907 when he had announced the formation of the Country Life Commission. I think this Country Life Commission was basically seen as a landmark institution which tries to understand the rural society and also try to see the development which took place in the rural society. So, basically we try to find out that the different things which have been floated or worked out by the previous scholars could not give a right direction to the rural sociology, but the contribution of President T.S. Roosevelt, who tried to build up the rural sociology as a specialized discipline in terms of the holistic development of the American society, was seen as an important issue. And that way if you try to see, we try to find out that the Country Life Commission was basically seen as the Magna Carta with regard to the development of rural sociology as a specialized discipline. Now, when we say this contribution of Country Life Commission, what it has done, the basic purpose of the Country Life Commission was that it tries to understand the rural setting, the countryside. Normally when we try to speak about the western view, we normally try to associate rural with the countryside. So, the countryside basically represents what is the rural, and the important thing is in 1907 when T.S. Roosevelt tried to invent upon the Country Life Commission, he basically was trying to speak about that he was being impressed by the rural life in Ireland. Rural life in Ireland, basically the contribution of Thomas Plunkett, who was basically played significant role in the development of the rural society. So, the similar thing was been posed upon by T.S. Roosevelt, who tries to build upon the United States in terms of the rural society, in terms of the rural development. But the important thing is that when he tried to invent upon the Country Life Commission, he tried to associate many other things which took place in the different parts of the country. And here we try to find out that this commission, that is the Country Life Commission, it has submitted his report, and that report basically lead to the formation of an important issue, that is rural analysis was seen as an important site for the development of the nation. And here this rural life which was seen as an important contribution, and later on we try to see that it was J.M. Gillette who had published a significant book on rural society, and that was one of the landmark book which has came in 1916. So, I think in 1907 the Country Life Commission was formed, and then we tried to find out that G.M. Gillett has come out with a contribution, that is the rural society. So, I think people started working upon, researching upon the rural society in a specific way, and similarly we tried to find out that gradually the academic growth of the discipline of the rural sociology had started. Basically, we have one significant contribution by Professor Giddings, by Professor Franklin Giddings, who was seen as an important figure, and he had basically posed upon the dissertation at the Columbia University, the doctoral dissertation on rural sociology, which was seen as one of the significant issue with regard to the development of sociology, rural sociology as a discipline. And also we try to see that another significant person whom we can rate to be significant for the development of rural sociology in United States is Charles Galpin. Charles Galpin, whose contribution again we try to see was to be seen in terms of the Bureau of Agriculture Economics, and also he was been appointed at the University of Wisconsin for the development of the agriculture society, and this agricultural economics and the agricultural society was one of an important department which tries to explore upon the different aspects of the rural society. Now, when we try to move ahead, we try to see that the rural population which we try to speak about, or the changing rural life, it was to be studied in a specific fashion, and here the important thing that comes into the picture of course is that we need to have certain rural sociological researches, and these rural sociological researches are going to be significant for making the rural sociology as a specific discipline. And here we try to find out that when we had the significant contribution by group of people, especially we try to refer it as a systematic source book on rural sociology, and this work is basically by a group of peoples which came in 1930, and the significant people included Sorokin, then we have Zimmerman, we have Zimmerman, and also we have Charles J. Galpin. So, I think this contribution, that is the systematic source book on rural sociology, was the landmark contribution in the field of rural sociology, which was basically seen as the insights for many. And later on we try to see that the formation of a specific society, that is the rural sociological society, came into existence. And this rural sociological society was basically seen as an organization, as a society which is basically meant for doing researches in American society in the rural areas. And this rural sociological society has come out with a magazine which is titled as Rural Sociology. So, this magazine Rural Sociology, which we try to see, it came into existence in 1936, and in 1936 we try to see that gradually the contribution which has been reflected in the rural sociology and rural sociological society, which has got in prominence in 1937, I think this has basically led to the academic growth of rural sociology as a discipline. So, we had plenty of experiments, we have plenty of measures which has been taken up by various scholars, and they try to analyze, understand, interpret rural sociology in the different framework. But the important thing is that in order to get a specific shape in terms of an academic contribution, we try to see that when the rural sociological society was established, and also along with that we has a significant publication in the form of the Rural Sociology, that is a magazine, but it will be news for you that this Rural Sociology was basically seen as a official journal of the rural sociology in the later phase. So, how the initial attempts has gradually led to the emergence of the specific journal or the specific group of scholars, or in terms of a specific contribution in terms of work or the researches, has basically led to the emergence of rural sociology as a discipline. So, we try to see that at one end we had the so called administrative appeal, or the administrative purpose was involved, that is the contribution which we try to see by T.S. Roosevelt, who basically tried to build upon the specific discipline which can study and deal with the problems and the prospects of the rural society, that is the countryside. So, that was an administrative appeal, that is there was a political will to improve upon the conditionality of the countryside, but that was not suffice to bring about the transformation in the countryside. So, gradually it has been taken a shift with the understanding and analysis by the reputed scholars, the academicians, who basically tried to build up it as a systematic discipline. And why that is important? That is important because if we have that, then only we try to see that we can have the systematic understanding and analysis of the rural sociology. So, I think these attempts has basically led to the emergence of rural sociology at certain period of time. But later on, when we try to move further, we try to find out that there are certain other important things, that how it has taken its shapes in the world framework, because these were the issues which were restricted to the United States, but how we try to see that it has taken its shape in the later phase. But parallelly, if you try to see in United States, what has happened of course is that there was a federal government of US, federal government of United States, which has provided the fund also. So, it is not simply the government efforts, it is not simply the systematic studies, but also required to have certain funds, and these funds are basically through the agricultural experiment stations, and these funds are basically been part of the agricultural experiment stations, and these agriculture experiment stations were basically seen as playing a significant role, and these funds were basically an outcome of the 1887 legislation, which is called in a popular way the Hatch Act. So, the 1887 Hatch Act has the provision of providing the funds, that is through the agriculture experiment station, and that has been sponsored by the United States government. And also we have another significant act, that is the US KANPUR-NPTEL Act. US KANPUR-NPTEL Act, which we try to see has been implemented in 1925. So, US KANPUR-NPTEL Act of 1925 also played a significant role in providing the research fund to the scholars and to the academicians working in the field of agrarian economics, or the agrarian economics, or what one can say the home science, the home economics, which basically deals with the contribution and production in the field of the countryside. So, these were significant contribution in terms of the sponsored projects, the fundraisings which have been done. Now, if you try to see, I think we try to see the structuring of the rural sociology in terms of the academic will, in terms of the governmental will, that is the political will, in terms of the academic scholarship by the different contributors individually, collectively, and then gradually we try to see that we try to move ahead in terms of providing funds in the field of researches, so that the scholars and the scholarship will be generated, and through that the multiple contribution can be seen in the field of the countryside. So, this is basically the growth of rural sociology which took place in the United States at the initial phase, but how it has taken a bigger shape in terms of its spread effect at the wider society, and for that I think we try to see that the shift which took place across the world, basically we are trying to hint upon the Second World War. So, Second World War was basically seen as an important turning point for the growth of the academic disciplines, because at that period of time we tried to find out that the European power was gradually shifting and the United States has tried to hegemonize or try to have a better control on the rest of the world. So, this is basically one important aspect in which we try to see that the Second World War onwards, we try to see that there was a drastic shift which took place in terms of the transfer of the knowledge. And here I think for understanding the human civilization or for understanding the so called reconstruction of the countryside or the social life, there was a requirement of a specific discipline which can deal with the understanding about the countryside. And here who were seen as the specialist? It was the United States. So, the United States has tried to build upon its specialization, and it also tries to extend the frontiers beyond the boundaries of United States, and it has reached to the Europe and also to the other part of the East. So, we try to see that United States was trying to have its expertise first in the field of countryside as a specialist. Now, their knowledge is going to be transferred to the Europe and the East, and that is how we try to see that these shifts took place. Especially we try to see the so called Point 4 programs, which was seen as one of the significant program for the development of the countryside. And these point programs which has been invented and has been carried forward by the United States, they were basically responsible for the understanding as well as the implementation of the various rural policies for the development of the countryside in the part of the world. And here if we try to see, we try to find out that United States was basically acting as an important player, which was basically trying to understand not only the rest of the world or trying to help rest of the world, but they were also trying to make certain changes and also try to have certain amount of hegemony with regard to the understanding of the rural society. So, that way if we try to see, we try to find out that the United States was seen as the biggest partner with the rest of the world in terms of transforming their wisdom, their knowledge to rest of the world. And we try to see that the so called East, which was basically in the phase of the developing or the underdeveloped situation, it has started following the intellectuals or the intelligentsia of the United States. But the important thing is that what makes the other countries to follow the United States, especially like I said that the Point 4 program was one of the serious program which was basically designed to carry forward the development in the countryside. But what is more important is that these programs were trying to understand not only the rest of the world, but also trying to carry forward certain skills or maybe certain specialists as a package to the rest of the world. So, I think we try to see that it was not simply the transfer of skills and specialists, but we also try to see that certain amount of hegemonization was also being carried forward by United States through these programs. Just for your kind information, if you try to see that we had the first development program, that is the community development program, it was having its inspiration from the United States. So, we try to see that many of the things which we had taken as a startup are being the what you can say far sighted or the consequences of or the carrying forward of the United States policies in the rest of the world. And that is how we try to see that certain amount of hegemonization of the knowledge of the patency has been started by the country in a specific framework. Now, here we try to see that once the United States has established its hegemony, we try to see how we can locate the development of rural sociology in United States, and then coming down to the second framework, that is our own country, the Indian society. So, we try to see that what made the understanding about the development of rural sociology in India. And here if you try to see, we try to find out that we had many things which has contributed towards the development of the rural sociology in Indian society. I think first thing or the first major reason which led to the establishment of rural sociology as a discipline will be that majority of the population in India was into the agriculture. Normally we try to say that more than 70% of the population is engaged in agriculture. So, in order to have the upliftment of the rural society, for the reconstruction of the rural society and also for the better administration of the rural society, we try to have the discipline which can cater to the needs of the countryside of the Indian society. And here we try to see that rural sociology was seen as an important branch which can have the better understanding about the rural sociology, the rural society in a specific way. But when we try to see in terms of its emergence or its origin, we normally try to say that it was basically in the 19th century that we try to see that the rural sociology has grounded in India. The rural sociology has grounded in India, and we had the prominent scholars who try to contribute or try to understand the rural society in their own way. I think certain names that needs significance especially is the contribution by Sir Henry Maine. Sir Henry Maine's contribution, basically we have the two significant contribution, one is Ancient Law and another is Ancient Society. So, these two works were seen as the landmark work in the field of rural sociology, which has basically tried to understand the rural society in a specific way. We also have the contribution by Charles Metcalfe, whose contribution is again going to be significant with regard to the rural sociology. We have Thomas Munro. Another significant contribution, we have Baden-Powell, and also we try to see the contribution of Slater. I think all these people, the scholars, although they were not the thorough academicians, but their contribution had been quite significant for understanding the rural society. And here if we try to see in a very clear cut way, most of these scholars, they wanted to understand the rural society in terms of the specific framework. Like when we try to speak about the contribution of Henry Maine in terms of Ancient Law and Ancient Society, he was trying to devise or he was trying to have the mapping of the various practices which are been there in the rural. Especially we try to speak about the customary laws, we try to speak about the land tenure system, or we try to speak about the contribution in terms of the kinship network. So, I think these are the things which are required to be understood in order to have a better understanding about the countryside. Similarly, we had many surveys, economic surveys have been there, especially this latter's contribution in terms of economic survey has been quite significant for understanding the rural society. But beyond that, if you try to see the economic surveys which were again beneficial for understanding the rural society, but more than that, what is more significant is that these practices or these things which have been done, either they were being done for a specific purpose, which we can say in a more jacketed way, that is it was having an administrative purpose for analyzing and interpreting the rural society. And most of the scholar, to a greater extent, they have followed the ethnographic technique for understanding and analyzing the Indian society, especially the rural society. But these contributions could not bring the systematic knowledge about looking to the rural society. So, we try to find out that later on we had certain other systematic growth which took place in the rural India, and that has been carried forward basically after the first constitution, the formation of the Constitution of India. Later on we try to find out that we had systematic implementation of the CDP, that is the Community Development Program. So, the Community Development Program was seen as an important project for bringing about the transformation and development of the rural society. The CDP program, which has been inspired by the 4H Club of the United States, and more than that, the CDP program was seen as the with a specific motto was the self help and mutual help. So, self-help and the mutual help was the basic motto of the community development program, and this community development program, which was been initiated in 1952, has made a significant change in terms of the development of the rural India. But again, one thing which we have to humbly accept and admit is that although this was seen as one of the first rural development program in India, it could not bring a drastic change in the rural society because of certain limitation. S.C. Dubey has basically tried to pinpoint the analysis of the community development program, and many other scholars try to see that community development program was to a greater extent a failure, and the reason for that being the question of the interventions of the bureaucracy, the lack of trust between the masses and the government, and also the amount of decentralization which could not take place. So, I think these are the reasons which has led to the partial failure of the community development program in India. But the CDP was gradually been followed by the new program, which was basically seen as the policy matter to overcome the faults and lacunas of the CDP, and I think the popular name which you try to see is the Panchayati Raj. So, basically we try to see that Panchayati Raj was basically seen as a review based critical analysis of the CDP, which tries to overcome the faults and the lacunas which have been there in the community development program. So, we try to see that the failure of one program has led to the emergence of another program, which of course is successfully running in the different parts of the country. But beyond that, if you try to see, we try to find out that the contribution of significant people, the scholarship, if you try to see, that becomes important, because when we try to speak about the rural sociology or we try to speak about the contribution by the academician, then only we can say that there is a significant growth of the discipline. And here I think if you try to see, there are multiple names which needs a special attention, especially when we try to speak about the contribution in the area of rural society in terms of the specialization. The significant name includes Professor S.C. Dubey. S.C. Dubey, who had been contributing in the field of rural society, and the significant work is Indian village, and later on he was speaking about India's changing village. So, S.C. Dubey has tried to invent upon the Indian village in 1955, and also we try to see India's changing village, which was seen as an important contribution which came in 1958. So, that these were the two significant work which has tried to give some edge towards the understanding of the rural society in a systematic way. Then another name that deserves special attention, and you may be familiar with that, is the contribution of Professor M. N. Srinivas. M. N. Srinivas' famous work, that is India's villages, and this famous work, M. N. Srinivas' famous work India's villages, that came out in 1961, was an edited work which tried to incorporate the different what you can say studies. He tried to have the package of the various studies which has been contributed in the rural society. We also try to see that other significant contribution can be seen in terms of the contribution by Professor D. N. Majumdar, and D. N. Majumdar's famous work which we try to see, it basically is the rural profile, which came in 1955, and also we try to see another significant work, that is caste and communication. Caste and communication in an Indian village is another significant work of D. N. Majumdar, which had came in 1958. So, this is another significant contribution in the field of rural sociology, which was seen as a landmark work. And then if we have other scholars, I think Marriot's contribution is considered to be significant because it tries to understand the Indian society in a very specific way, and the contribution was Village India, and this Village India basically it came into existence in 1961. And then if we have other scholars in that field, we basically try to see the contribution of F. G. Bailey. F. G. Bailey's contribution, which we try to see in terms of caste and the economic frontiers. Caste and the economic frontiers, that is a significant work in the field of rural sociology, which came in 1957. And also we have other scholars like Professor Oscar Lewis, who try to see the specific framework of the rural society, and the work of course is Village Life in Northern India. Village Life in Northern India, and this was the work which came in 1958. And beyond that, I think one name that deserves the specific importance is the contribution by Professor A. R. Desai and his significant contribution, that is rural sociology in India, which was seen as a landmark contribution in the field of rural sociology. And this was the work which tries to put the rural sociology in a very specialized way, because it tries to incorporate multiple dimensions of the rural society, and it was having a contribution from the most reputed scholars in the field of rural sociology in general and sociology in particular. Here if you try to see the contribution of these scholars, I think one thing that becomes more significant is that most of these works were being seen as coming especially in 1950s, and in that way we try to see that 1950s was the era which has shown the significant changes, or it has, one can say that there is mushrooming of or the flooding of the studies on the rural society which took place in the rural India, and this was the era which also marked by the significant contribution in the field of village studies. So, I think we try to see that the rural sociology and the village studies having its relationship in terms of the era which is 1950s was the era where we have the significant contribution on the Indian villages, and most of the work which we have just mentioned, they try to reflect upon these contribution in their own way. Now, when we try to move ahead, I think one thing that will make you more pleasing or maybe more attracting will be that how we try to understand rural sociology, and if we have that understanding, I think basically we try to see it in terms of the specific definitions, because if we have the specific definitions that how we try to see rural sociology, then it becomes more powerful tool for understanding and analyzing the rural society. And here I think few name that deserves attention is the contribution of Sanderson. So, Sanderson, how he tried to define rural sociology, he tried to see that what rural sociology is. Rural sociology is the sociology of rural life. It is the sociology of the rural life in the rural environment. So, basically we try to see that what rural sociology does, it basically tries to understand the rural life in the rural environment. That is the simplest way in which we try to see what rural sociology is. Then we have the significant and the most systematic definition that came from A. R. Desai, and how A. R. Desai tries to understand what rural sociology is. What he says is that rural sociology is the science of the rural society. It is the science of the rural society. Now, this is first part, that what it is basically the science of rural society. Then he extends further that the laws of the structure and development, the laws of the structure and development, the laws of structure and development of the rural society in general, and as the discovering of the new laws or we try to see that what it does, it basically tries to see discovering of the new laws which can be seen as the spatial laws, discovering of the spatial laws which will be helpful in governing the particular society, which will be helpful in governing the particular society, that is what we say is the rural society. And apart from that, we also try to see that it is basically the sociology is seen as the science which incorporates the laws of development of rural societies, laws of development of rural society in terms of its reconstruction, in terms of its understanding, in terms of its development. So, he was trying to see not only rural sociology as a systematic discipline in terms of a specific science, but also how it can contribute towards the development or governance of the rural society. That was the way in which he tries to see. Then another significant name which deserves attention is the contribution by T.L. Smith, and how T.L. Smith tries to understand rural sociology, that he tries to say that we try to see the investigation, rather the social investigations of the programs of the phenomenon that are present only or confined to the rural environment. So, investigation in the rural environment, I think what Sanderson has said to some extent, and beyond that what has been talked about is persons engaged in the agricultural occupation. So, I think focusing upon the people who are basically into the agricultural practices, agriculture as an occupation. So, it basically tries to investigate upon the rural environment in that particular sense. Then we have the contribution by F. Stuart Chapin. F. Stuart Chapin, who tries to see rural sociology in a very specific way, and how Stuart Chapin tries to understand rural sociology is that the sociology of rural life, it is what? The sociology of rural life, it is the study of the rural population. So, focusing upon the rural population alone, and also rural social organizations, and also he tries to say that it incorporates the social processes, the rural social processes. So, all these things are going to be part and parcel of the definition of the rural sociology, which has been talked about by F. Stuart Chapin, and that has to be seen in terms of the comparative framework. So, we try to see another perspective for how we try to define the rural sociology. Then we have the contribution by Lowe Nelson. Lowe Nelson's contribution, if you try to see Lowe Nelson's contribution, basically tries to be seen in terms of the subject matter of rural sociology, and what has been talked about is that anything which exists in the rural environment is what the rural sociology does. So, it basically tries to speak about the subject matter of the rural environment, and that is basically the scope of rural sociology also. And in that way we try to see that we have the different understanding. One name which again deserves special attention in terms of understanding is, we try to speak about the contribution of Bertrand, who tries to understand rural sociology in terms of looking for the study of human relationship, human relationships are to be studied in the rural environment. So, if we have that, we are basically speaking about the rural sociology. So, I think these are the different ways in which we try to understand and interpret the emergence of rural sociology in its specific meaning, in terms of a specific way in which we can understand what rural sociology is and does, and that is how we try to see that it has certain amount of understanding which is trying to be seen as looking for the systematic analysis and research in the field of rural sociology. But as has been pointed out by A.R. Desai, that rural sociology is not simply a specialized discipline, but what it does is it basically tries to bring about certain amount of scientificness to the analysis of the rural society. And here the important thing is that we try to see that what rural sociology does, it basically tries to bring about the objectivity. So, we try to see that rural sociology in terms of its nature, we try to find out that the rural sociology has certain amount of objectivity, because it involves certain amount of science with regard to the analysis and understanding of a specific phenomenon. It is not everything which can come into the domain of rural sociology, it has a specialized way of looking to the things. So, objectivity is definitely one important parameter for making something to be science, and it is basically the rural sociology in terms of its nature having that appeal. Then another thing which again requires importance is the question of generality. So, generality also is making it more homogeneous across the society, across the field in that sense as such. So, generality definitely is another significant thing which we try to see in terms of its nature and which is part of the rural sociology. Then it is the question of verifiability. So, it is verifiable, it can be tested, it can be analyzed in that sense as such. So, verifiability is another crucial character of the nature of the rural sociology. Then it is also having the issue of rationality. Rationality meaning thereby that whatsoever we are putting is in terms of a specific logic, it is not something which is random, it is something which is coming out in terms of a specific reason which has been supported by some evidences. And also I think which normally is not been done by sociology in general, but to some extent in order to have the rural sociology, I think what is required is that we also believe on that this particular thing can even lead to the predictability. In a sense that when we try to formulate the laws, it should be based on certain predictions on the basis of which we try to see that how we can see it as a principle of the rural development. And then we try to see that how we can see them in terms of a specific system, because when we have the assemblage and the systematic analysis, we try to build up the system in which we can have the sophisticated literature, the sophisticated presentation of putting the rural sociology as a discipline. So, I think all these things basically it does what? It basically tries to bring about the use of the scientific method, and also it tries to incorporate the factual studies. Factual study, I think this is more important, because when we try to speak about the factual study, it gives strength to the discipline, that gives strength to the specific understanding. And what is more important is that if these facts are to be seen in terms of the cause effect relation, that is the understanding of the cause and what are the effects, if you try to understand those things, then it can be seen as more scientific. And more than that, I think when we have these cause effect relationship, sometimes it is or they may lead to certain amount of prediction in that sense as such. Although we do not try to believe totally on that as such, because the cause effect relationships are there, but it may always amount to the predictions is a bigger question, and that is what sometimes we try to see that the so called sociology in general, it lacks that scientific temper, because the predictions cannot be made on the basis of the cause effect relationship. So, we try to see that whatsoever has been talked about by the various scholars in terms of rural sociology is basically trying to focus upon the specific way in which we try to understand and interpret the rural sociology. And when we try to see that what can be the possible scope, or how or to what extent the rural sociology can have its domain, I think if you try to see in that context, we try to find out that anything and everything can be which is in and around the rural environment can be part and parcel of the scope of rural sociology. And in that way, we try to see that it is not simply the question of the rural people, but also the rural institutions, or we try to speak about the rural religion, rural environment, stratification, then the ecology, or we try to see the various practices, that is the social processes. All these things are going to be part and parcel for the understanding and analysis of the rural sociology, and this scope makes it more appealing, because if you try to see that our majority of the population is engaged in agriculture and the allied activities, and if you try to move further, that if we try to have the development and the transformation of the rural society, definitely it is going to be more fruitful with regard to the understanding and analysis of not only the rural economy, but also the development of the nation, Indian nation in general. But how these things are going to be more practical? I think what is needed is that we need to have very systematic understanding and analysis of the rural society, and that will come by, if you try to see that how we can generate that in terms of its discipline as a specialized discipline. We try to see that what has been done by our predecessors, either it is a contribution of Makim Marriott, S.C. Dubey, M.N. Srinivas, or we try to speak about the contribution of Oscar Lewis, D.N. Majumdar, or we try to speak about other scholars. We try to find out that these scholars had tried to have the holistic way of looking to the villages. And now, since we are moving towards the complex society, and that way if we try to see, the village is not seen as an isolated whole, rather we try to see, now we are having an era in which the rural urban connectivity is very much, we try to see the linkage between the rural and the urban, it has in we try to call now the global villages. So, that way we try to see the drastic changes are coming up in the rural society. So, then what is needed? We have to have maybe the parcel or the package studies, the focus studies, because now even the shift also is taking place, especially in the field of the specific perspective, like we are moving from the structural functional to the ethnographic, or we are moving towards the case studies, or we are moving towards the ethnomethodology or phenomenology. So, it is from macro to the micro, the shift has taken place. So, similarly we try to now focus upon the smaller units, the smaller issues which can be more meaningful in the understanding and analysis of the rural society. So, what is required in that sense, of course, is now we have to see the changes, we have to see the implications of the various strategies and the programs which are designed for bringing about the change in the rural society. And for that, I think there are many organizations, the state sponsored organizations which are working in the field of sociology in general and for rural sociology in particular. I think if we try to speak about the contribution of UGC, or we try to see the contribution of ICSSR, we try to find out that they had the project funding on the specific themes, on the specific areas, and ICSR basically tries to not only fund the projects, but it also tries to come out with the what you can say, the specific volume which basically deals with the trend report. And the ICSR trend report on sociology and social anthropology, it tries to put the trajectory of the last 10 years of what you can say, the researches and the studies which has been done on the specialized area. So, even on the rural sociology, what has been the pertinent issues, what are the different ways in which the rural society has been looked upon, and how and what are the changes which have taken place. So, in order to understand those things, we had the specific contribution from ICSR which is more authenticated. Even the so called monograph surveys which were focused upon the villages, especially we try to speak about the village monograph which were there in 1961, which tries to study the different parts of the country, especially we had specific village studies focusing upon the different aspect. So, I think there are significant contributions which have been done, which tries to put the village studies in a very focused way, And it is not only the question of village studies, rather we try to see that the analysis of the various programs are also there. I think when the time will come, we will try to speak about these issues, especially when we have the understanding about the theoretical and the methodological issues dealing with the village studies. So, I think these are certain things which we have to keep in mind, and since this is a basic understanding about the rural sociology in terms of its emergence and its growth, both at the world level and also at the Indian level, we have to see that how these things can be seen in a better way. I think if this grounding have some appeal to you, I think the rest of the lectures will be more appealing to you in terms of the better understanding. So, I think with those things, let us have further interaction in the further assignments that we will deliver, and we will try to have the specific understanding about the rural society in a specific fashion. Thank you.